As you know, my name is Mara Walsh, and I'll be your host today. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm glad to be back on Zoom today and happy to invite Anna back with us today. Anna's a licensed tour guide to Saint Petersburg, Russia. Due to Russian-Ukrainian war and her zero tolerance for her country's government, she had to leave her beloved city and her job. She's currently living in Israel and studying to become a licensed tour guide to the Holy Land. It's important for us to remember that many people in Russia do not support the war with Ukraine, and they are also victims of this war. I chose to support Anna with this virtual tour and others, and I think it's important for us to hear her perspective and learn about her birth city. We were just talking a little bit offline, and she misses it so much. We were talking about, you know, how you go online and you look at live cams for different places. You may have seen eagles give birth or, you know, elephants in the safari, and Anna spends some of her time just looking at live cams of her city because she misses it so much. So I think that it's really important for us to get a human perspective on how this war not only affects those that are in the Ukraine, but also in Russia and beyond. I'm so glad that she was willing to share with us the second largest and one of the most famous museums in the world today. We get to visit the Hermitage Museum. Before we get started on the virtual tour presentation, I do want to go over a couple things for housekeeping reasons. This is a Zoom webinar, which means you are not seen or heard. It also means that you can freely, you know, talk at home or get up and go. We don't see you, and you don't have to worry about that. But we do want you to interact with us. There is a chat mechanism if you want to chat with me during the presentation, if you have something that you want to let me know of. But if you want to leave a question about the presentation or for Anna specifically, please leave it in the Q&A on the toolbar, because we will address the questions after the presentation, and Anna will go over all of those then. Okay, as you may be aware, you know, I started traveling with my tour guide friends virtually when COVID struck, and these virtual tour presentations have helped so many tour directors from all over the world, and they've been able to share many parts of this world with us. So it's a win-win. They've been helped, and so have we. So we're all very fortunate to have found each other, and I think that's one blessing from COVID. We've done more than 80 virtual tours, and the recordings are available for free on girltraveltours.com. They're also available on my YouTube channel as well as my Facebook page. So if you have missed them, I have to believe you've missed some, because there were so many that have been recorded. Please go up and check them out at your leisure, or revisit them if you'd like. If you want to be sure to get an announcement of the future upcoming virtual tours, as well as what we're doing at Girl Travel Tours, you can go on Girl Travel Tours and just put your name and your email in, and we'll make sure to add you to our email list. Today's tour and all of our tours are scheduled for a 60-minute content portion, plus another 10 to 30 minutes of Q&A, depending on how many questions are asked. As indicated, today we have Anna with us. She will lead us through the Hermitage Museum. I will share with you via the chat and during the Q&A a way for you to leave a tip if you appreciate this presentation and our guide's knowledge of this wonderful museum. All of the tips go directly to Anna today, minus the Zoom operating expenses. So today I want to welcome Anna back with us to join us and say hello to you again from me. Feel free to come on and take the controls and share your screen, and we'll get right into it.
Okay. Well, I hope everybody is ready for the virtual tour, and you can hear me well and you can see me well. Please let us know in the chat. First of all, thank you so much, Paula. Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank Mara and all of you for inviting me, for having me back for another tour. The first tour was, well, I was overwhelmed, with the gratitude for your understanding, for your also like tolerance and your interest in Saint Petersburg, Russia, in the context of the whole situation. And thank you for it, and thank you for the massive support. It really means the world to me. And I feel super privileged to take you to one of my most favorite places in St. Petersburg. And, taking into account that I believe that St. Petersburg is just the best place in the world to me. Sorry, I'm being a bit biased, but I'm just super excited to be there again. So thank you so much for taking me back home, even though it's virtually, and it's still better than a live cam because we're going inside. I have the video recorded for me by a friend of mine, a professional videographer. And today we're going to walk along all the buildings of the Hermitage Museum complex. Well, almost all of them, the museum is huge. I will fill you in when we begin. And I also included some extra footage, from the open sources, just, to help us connect some dots. As Mara already said, all the questions I will be happy to address after we are done with the tour per se. And I hope Mara will help me also sort the questions out in a more efficient way so I could address as many as possible. I'm going to start sharing my screen. Okay. Okay, well, I hope everything works fine. And yeah, I think this is the best thing to do. Okay, very good. The full screen mode. Welcome. So this is probably the most popular photo that can come up in your feed when you look for St. Petersburg, when you look for the Hermitage Museum. I know that in the past year and a half, there hasn't been much reason to look for St. Petersburg, but still, this is the palace, and it is called the Hermitage Museum, but it's not exactly correct to say it's the Hermitage because it's one of the buildings of the Hermitage Museum complex. And in fact, this is the oldest of them, and it's called the Winter Palace. And when it was constructed, it had nothing to do with the museum. There was no need for a museum at that point. And I also need to fill you in a little bit about Russian history, because St. Petersburg is a very young city. It was established in 1703 only. Before that, Moscow was the capital. And here, these lands were under control of the Swedish for less than a century. Before that, they also used to be the Russian territory, but those were mostly the marshes, the mosquito-ridden territories with a few villages here and there. But the big history of St. Petersburg started only later in the 18th century. And everything we see is just no older than that. That's it. So a little bit over 300 years. And when this palace was constructed, it was only let's say the middle of the 18th century. Can you imagine? They would finish by 1763. And this is when the history of the Hermitage would start. The founding father of St. Petersburg is Peter the Great. And everything in my city, like when we did the city tour of St. Petersburg, those of you who watched that tour, I don't know if you ever really counted how many times I would mention Peter the Great, and you probably would just lose count. It's absolutely impossible because everywhere in St. Petersburg, there's Peter the Great, but not in the name, by the way. My city is named after Apostle Peter, is one of the patron saints of the city. But yeah, it was the choice of Peter the Great, so who knows? But there's one building that actually has nothing to do with Peter, and this is the Hermitage Museum. And the monarch that had everything to do with the Hermitage is actually Catherine the Great. The palace was commissioned by the daughter of Peter the Great, Empress Elizabeth, not Catherine, but she didn't live a day in the palace. She died just before it would be finished. And the first resident of the Winter Palace would be Catherine the Great. The Winter Palace was meant to be the winter residence for the court of the Romanovs, for the courtiers, for ladies in waiting, for doctors, for teachers, for guards, and well, and all the extended family. But Catherine the Great managed to turn it into a museum. It wasn't the idea to turn it into a public museum, but well, in 1764, Catherine the Great happened to purchase the collection of like some 200 exhibits from a Prussian merchant. And, you know, she liked it. She liked this feeling of acquiring some works of art and placing them, showcasing them in the palace. And from then on, just once she got the taste of it, she would be unstoppable. So over the course of her reign, that is over 40 years, well, she really holds the record here, and the women in the empresses on the Russian throne. So over the course of her rule, she managed to acquire thousands and thousands of exhibits. And today, we're going to kill two birds with one stone. We're going to see some of those exhibits, but also we're going to see the interiors. We're going to see the buildings. We're going to walk through all those buildings and, well, try to take in the vibe of the places. So it's like a museum visit, but also a visit to a residence. Well, you'll see what I'm talking about. And before I take you indoors, I want to make sure we're on the same page about actually what's going on here. So this is the aerial image I sourced from online of the Palace Square. So this is the Palace Square, obviously named after the Winter Palace. Look at this. The Winter Palace is the biggest over here. So it was supposed to house 3,000 people of the court members, a winter residence for 3,000 people. Again, no museum in mind. When Catherine the Great moved in and as she started to collect art, she would actually also commission more and more buildings. And I would like to show you another image so we could get the understanding. So now, just on the territory of the Palace Square, there are 6 museum buildings. Winter Palace, small Hermitage, old, new Hermitage Theater, and the General Staff Building, right? And these are not the only museum buildings. There are about 5, actually 6 more in Saint Petersburg, also a number of branches all around the country and even abroad. And it's not surprising because the Hermitage is one of the biggest museums in the world in terms of the size of the collection. Right now, it numbers, well, slightly less than 2 million exhibits. So it's not possible to exhibit all the collection, you know, all those collections in those dozens of buildings. Of course not. So there's also huge storage that nobody but the museum specialists can visit. But I think this is enough, you know. Today we're going to visit these number of buildings, so the 5 of them. And the very common question is, okay, so you have all sorts of art, but where is the 20th century? Where are the Impressionists? The Impressionists used to be in the Winter Palace, but, well, some dozen years ago, they were moved here, well, across the square to the General Staff Building. We will talk a little bit about that, but later on. So I would like to begin with the tour and not to waste any more time. But it's important to mention that the Winter Palace per se, as the residence, was home to the Romanovs. So it was both the official residence for official receptions for the delegations, but also it was the home. And the Winter Palace sort of split into 2 parts, the gala part, you know, the official part, and the private section. And I was thinking that, okay, well, trying to squeeze in, well, let's say 3 million exhibit museum and also the interiors and the history of the Romanovs house that is more than 300 years. Okay, that's quite a challenge. But I was thinking that I was hoping to find a happy middle. On the one hand, I will be showing you some exhibits. We're going to be seeing some of them, but I also wanted to make sure I have enough time to take you to some private parts of the palace to show you what the life was like, of the Romanovs after the party, so when the parties were over. And this is the photograph taken in 1914 from the palace square. Nicholas II, the last Russian emperor, is standing on the balcony of the Winter Palace. And you see the color. Well, it's black and white, but I'm sure one can tell it's not exactly the original. It's not the color, the same color that we have now, not the green one. Because just before the revolution of 1917, in the early 20th century, the Winter Palace was painted in scarlet red. Other than that, the palace is the same. The interiors are the same. None of this was really damaged by the Second World War, neither by the revolution, and we're going to talk about it. Because not only the Winter Palace is the home to the Romanovs, part of the museum building, but it was the venue for the very big, very important, like really the absolutely pivotal point in the Russian history, and not only the Revolution of October 1917. After which the Russian Empire would collapse completely and the new regime, the Soviet regime, would take over. By saying that Winter Palace is home, it's impossible to, well, just not mention the family of the last Russian monarch. So in the end, we're going to see some of the private rooms where the family of Nicholas II used to live for a short while. This is also important to, I think it's important to mention. So finally now, after all this long but quite important introduction, I would like to welcome you. And we'll start with the Ambassador's Staircase. The video was taken in 2022. I think it was spring 2022. Or maybe, no, I think it was fall 2022, but it's definitely after the start of the war. But as you see, people visit the Hermitage. There are tourists, both Russian tourists and international tourists. Life goes on. I'm not encouraging anyone to go there, so we have virtual tours for it. But it's important to see that, well, it's still there, museums live, museums work and welcome visitors. And I believe that art is something that should be absolutely, on the one hand, should really reflect the context of time, but on the other hand, it's eternal and should not be affected by the politics, at least in the short run. Well, the Gogh Staircase, you see how huge it is. So Ambassador's Staircase, even in the name, the name speaks for itself. Take a look at that. So actually the entire staircase occupies 3 floors, and you see the abundance of colors, and you see a lot of gold here and there. So as you might remember from the previous tour, one of the, I would say, key features of Saint Petersburg that it's important to understand that it's all gold that glitters in St. Petersburg. And if you see a gilded detail, it is gold. Like you will see it as the tour goes. So the idea was to impress, to show off, in front of the honorable guests, the delegations from all over Europe. And it's important because, again, I mentioned that St. Petersburg, well, was born just, half a century before the palace would open its doors, not to everyone, but to some VIP guests. So the idea was to show that the newly born city that represents the entire country represents it on the proper level: gold, might, space, and art. And the middle of the 1700s is the period when the Baroque style would be predominant, and we see it from here. So Baroque style is always about the excess of decorative elements. It's always also meant to fool your eyes. Well, take a look at that. So all around the perimeter of the ceiling painting, which is, of course, would be something related to mythology. And this is the Mount Olympus, just in case, This is the imitation of the 3D plaster moldings, but this is actually not. It's 2D. This is just to fool your eyes. And there will be a lot of tricks like that. Over there, you can see the windows. These are the real windows, but these are not. These are mirrors, fake windows. Why? To make the place seem even bigger, So the walls are predominantly white. That's also visually going to, well, expand, enlarge the room. So that's about it. And of course, the columns. The columns are made from granite, so the solid piece of granite. And we're going to see the huge collection of different kinds of stone, of different kinds of wood, different kinds of semi-precious stones used in the decoration of the interiors. Again, the Winter Palace, every room in the Winter Palace, especially in the official part, was meant to impress, was meant to convey a certain message, that it was worth to run business with the country, that it was that the country was reliable and the rich partner. And as I'm saying that, I also understand that things have changed starting from February last year, but let's stay in the context of the pre-war times as much as possible. But yes, the war is always on my mind, and I wish, things were different. And by the way, speaking of the mirrors, they are the original 18th century mirrors. Some of them, of course, were restored. Some of them probably would be replaced and created to the old technologies. But as other than that, this is the original. As I said, the palace wasn't really harmed in the turmoil of the 20th century at all. And speaking of the sculptures, it's marble. Of course, if it's marble in the palace, it's the best white marble from Carrara, Italy. Well, welcome to the number of gala rooms, for official reception. So we start with the impressive part, right? So to create the first impression, and we're going to see some of the most remarkable rooms. I wish I could show you all the hundreds of rooms. I wish I could take you to hundreds of different staircases, but that's not possible. There's no need to do that. So I've taken the highlights so you would know. This is the room of coat of arms. You wouldn't see the coat of arms just everywhere in the room. You see, it's definitely something about the war. Yes, so war is always, the military topic was always one of the most, one of the predominant ones. But the coat of arms are actually hidden on the chandeliers. Here, there, on the small metal plaques, gilded metal plaques on the chandeliers. Other than that, what you see is the columns. Don't worry, the columns are not made from the solid piece of gold. That's not even possible, because gold is a very soft metal, and there is no way you can make the columns of such size made up entirely of gold. So it's not. And they are on the second floor. So don't worry, they are not the monolith, stone columns. They're concrete, but they are covered with a gold leaf. So one can say that this is the gold room, but it's not. There is another gold room, which we're going to see in the end. So what the room was used for? Mainly for parties, for official parties, for the premieres, for aristocratic girls that would, at the age of 13, have their first ball, have their first dance with the cavalier, with the gentleman, with the chevalier, and then, so you know the story. Another room, which is quite politicized. The room is called the Hall of Fame of 1812. Why is it important? Because this is the year when the important battle against Napoleon took place. In 1812, Napoleon almost invaded Moscow. Moscow was damaged severely, but Saint Petersburg was unharmed. In charge of the country at that time was Emperor Alexander I, who was, by the way, the grandchild of Catherine the Great, an apple of her eye. And in the center of the room, you can see Alexander I riding his favorite horse, Diamond. And we're going to be mentioning Alexander quite a number of times today, because for the Russian history, this victory over Napoleon was a turning point. Why? It was a complete game changer. Starting from that victory, the reputation of the country, and the perception of Russia as an important player, on the international arena, have changed completely, and it would become one of the. in the early 19th century, St. Petersburg would actually be one of the most important and most popular tourist destinations. Of course, I'm not mentioning the Middle East, because after Napoleonic invasions to Egypt, well, of course, the world went absolutely crazy. Let's say the Western world, European world, went absolutely crazy about all things Egyptian. But other than that, so we know some of the most remarkable, guidebooks of St. Petersburg would be issued in the early 19th century. Okay, but that's just the former glory. And it's sort of great that Alexander cannot see what's happening nowadays. And also, when you see those chandeliers, this is rock crystal. This is not just glass, No, everything is supposed to impress. So not glass, the rock crystal. You see here the portraits. Here in the entire hall are more than 300 portraits of the most distinguished officers that, well, showed their courage, showed their bravery in the battlefield of that war against Napoleon. And from there, so it's very easy to pass, to the next big room, which we're definitely going to see. But I want to take you to another spot, a very small one, but very important. This is the small church of the Romanovs. In every royal residence was supposed to be a small church. In every aristocratic house was supposed to be a church. And this is the church where Catherine the Great herself would be praying in the morning and in the evening. This is the church where some of the children of the Romanovs would be baptized, where the mourning ceremonies, for the family would be held as well in this very church. This church is consecrated. Well, the church is the Church of the Resurrection, and this is the Christian Orthodox Church. However, it doesn't look very Orthodox, right? So look at these gilded elements, look at the volumes. But once you see this, you can immediately say this is the Orthodox Church, because what you see is the wall with icons called iconostasis, so the wall with icons. And in the heart, in the very center, are the Tsar gates that actually separate the congregation from the sanctum, right, where the communion is prepared. So there's some details that are absolutely similar and identical throughout the Christian churches, but the iconostasis is something quite peculiar of the Eastern Orthodox Church. And you see that some of the places are empty. Why so? Well, this is the pillow from the Soviet times. After the revolution of 1917, that partly took place here in the Winter Palace, and when, as a result of which Vladimir Lenin would become the head of the country. So the churches throughout the country would be robbed, would be deprived of their attributes. The crosses, the bells would be smashed down on the ground and break into smithereens, and then all these things. So there used to be icons here, but the church would be looted. Well, looted maybe is not the proper word, but it would be the icons would be extracted and sold. So after the revolution, and I'm going to mention it further on, many art objects from the entire collection of the Hermitage Museum would be sold at a very low price, because the newly born country needed money to develop and to restore itself after the First World War. A very unusual thing over here is this pulpit. Pulpits are not typical for Christian Orthodox churches, but it's here because the architect who built the palace was Italian born, and he would build the churches the way he knew how to build them. And this is okay about St. Petersburg. Most of the churches are Orthodox ones, but they're built by Catholic architects. It's totally fine to see a pulpit that would be just there, but it would not be used on the service. A very important church, because exactly here the wedding ceremony of Nicholas II, the last Russian Romanov, would be held. And this is the image, the painting of how things work. It happened exactly in these rooms. And speaking of the Romanovs, so I mentioned that it was home to the last Romanovs as well. But there is another palace that I would be taking you on the 18th of October. And I hope Mara will schedule this tour shortly. I will be taking you to the actual home of the Romanovs, Alexandra Palace, the palace from where the Romanovs would be taken to exile in 1917 to never, ever, ever come back. I'm saying it with a smile, but it's not funny. So I'm not really smiling. Well, speaking of this church, sometimes here are temporary exhibitions held, and there was one exhibition that I was lucky to attend. Normally, here would be the exhibits connected with the, with the Romanovs, and very often with the last Romanovs. So, for example, there was an exhibition only with one and only exhibit, the white shirt of Nicholas II with his blood on it. During his visits to Japan in 1906, and you can see the actual photograph taken back then, Nicholas II was, there was an attempt of assassination by a Japanese guard. Nicholas survived the t-shirt as well, the shirt as well. And then this shirt would be used by the DNA specialists to identify the bones found in Yekaterinburg. And exactly thanks to this shirt, the body of Nicholas II, the bones of Nicholas II were identified. And this is the Pentecost, the ceiling painting. We call it plafond. It's, by the way, the original, but it took a toll on the restorators because because the ceiling paint is normally all covered in dust, in soot, and in the 18th century there was no other way to heat the place but with the wood and coal. And later on in the 18th century it would be the steam machines, and of course this would affect all the artworks. Okay, so now we are back to the big room, and it's the big throne room. I'll try not to pause or pause the video because there is a lot to share. And the big throne room was meant for official receptions, for the delegation, for conferences. And the room has actually never changed. It's the same throne. It's been here forever. And this is the throne where Nicholas II himself used to sit on. At the back, you can see the golden embroidery of the double-headed eagle. This is the state emblem of the country, of course, with the crown on top, with the Romanovs crown on top. And you see the columns of the white marble. So those are the actual monolith columns, and we're on the second floor. Take a look. The room hasn't changed at all, right? This is Nicholas, one of his first official portraits. Or over here, this is the photograph taken in 1906, when after the first Russian Revolution of 1905, Nicholas finally made some concessions to the people and established the parliament, Duma. So this is the official ceremony of establishment of the state Duma. Nothing really has changed, only the times, but the room is still here. So the same columns, the monolith columns, in order to secure the floor of the second floor, they had to just secure the walls on the first floor. Other than that, it's all the same. Now let's take a look at the room. I promised you different kinds of wood, and just at the floor you will see the original pattern, the original floors, and you will see later on that there is a very special reason for this floor to be designed this way. You will see the connection. And in the entire Hermitage Museum, in the Winter Palace and other rooms, it is believed that about 20 kinds of precious wood have been used. Look at this. It's the original floor. So one of the most common questions that I'm asked is whether you actually have to wear those overshoes, those sort of sleepers or something. Well, actually you had to. And in some palaces, you still have to wear them. But in Saint Petersburg, they realized it's way too costly, to dress everyone in those overshoes. So what they do instead, in the end of the day, when everybody's gone, they would just wash and polish the floor every single night. You remember the design on the floor? The very same design you can find on the ceiling. And it's all gilded, just saying, in case you forgot. And there's only one difference. On the ceiling, there is also the coat of arms, the double-headed eagle. And over there, you see? But on the floor, this is not possible because you cannot walk on the state symbol. Now, believe it or not, but we have switched from the Winter Palace to another building, the Hermitage Pavilion. Normally, sometimes, especially when you visit Hermitage for the first time, you just don't even notice how you switch from one building to another, and it's fine. So this Hermitage Pavilion is famous for two things. The most important exhibit is, of course, this clock created in the 18th century to commission of Catherine the Great by James Cox. Well, let's say James Cox was I sometimes compare him to, like his clocks to Ferrari, they were Ferraris in the world of clocks. Let's put it this way. So they were expensive, they were unique, and to find James Cox clocks running in perfect condition nowadays is almost impossible. There are a lot preserved, but the mechanisms are out of order. This is different. Every detail in this clock is still working, and there is the special clocksmith in the Hermitage that takes care of this clock, and once a week they actually wind it up, and then you can see how it moves, how the peacock opens its tails and shakes the head, how the rooster moves its head and actually says cock-a-doodle-doo, and you see the owl there, and the owl moves its head, and there is a squirrel, and there is a dragonfly, and many, many other details, gilded bronze. Everything is in the perfect condition, and it happens once a week. And there used to be even special tickets sold, the special ceremony of the peacock clock. The room. That's quite different, Well, like it shows that this is a different style. It's not the Baroque because it's not Baroque. It's the Moorish style. This pavilion was constructed to commission of Catherine the Great a bit later. So a couple decades later, after the Winter Palace was constructed. And at that time, so the Moorish style would come into its own. It was like a big fad throughout, the European courts. And the main reason to build this palace, the pavilion, was to actually, place artworks, because Catherine's passion for art collecting, as I said, would be unstoppable. And she quite shortly ran out of space, ran out of the empty walls. And not only she would buy, paintings, like fine art, she would buy furniture, she would buy jewelry, she would buy porcelain, cutlery, dishes, clothing, and whatnot. So she needed more space, so she commissioned to build the pavilion. And before we move on, I would like to just, look through the window, and we'll come closer. But before we do that, so you see that we're looking for the glass, where one section of it is purple. So the purple, the pinkish one, is the original, it's the 18th century glass. It wasn't pink back then. So it wasn't like Edith Piaf, Catherine didn't see the world in pink. Most of these glasses actually as of the 19th century, but some pieces are of the 18th century. But it's just because they used gold back then just to reach the transparency. And with time, as the course of the chemical reaction, this would give this pinkish shade. I'm not sure how it works, but what I wanted us to see is this. So this is the Neva River. And last time when we did the city tour of Saint Petersburg, we actually started there on the cape of the Basil Island, and then we walked along the embankment looking at the Winter Palace, on the opposite shore and the opposite bank, and then over there we would cross the palace bridge. So whenever I see this, something, but my heart, I don't know, sinks a little bit. Okay, so at the Hermitage. So this pavilion was given a name Hermitage. And later on, the name of this pavilion would give name to the museum. But I remind you, at that point, there was no idea in Catherine's head to create a museum. The other reason why this pavilion was built also, well, there was this, trend set by the actually European courts, the French court. In every royal residence, there was supposed to be a Hermitage pavilion from the word hermit, right? So if an aristocrat or a monarch wanted to be alone without anybody, spying, eavesdropping on them, they would need a Hermitage pavilion for it. This is the video I found on YouTube. This basically illustrates how interesting an interesting mechanism was implemented. So this is the Hermitage table. So the idea was that a monarch or an aristocrat would have a small dinner, in a very, very close circle of friends, and the servants were not supposed to be around. So in order to protect themselves from anybody, extra spying on them, all the servants would be downstairs, and they would be serving, their masters by using those mechanisms. Normally there would be a menu a la carte. An honorable guest would choose what they would want for dinner, would write it on a piece of paper, place it on the plate, push the button, the plate would go down, the entire section would go down, and then the servants would very quickly fill in the plates with the dish chosen, and then it would go back like that. Unfortunately, in the Hermitage, that table did not survive. We are not sure what happened to it, but we can still find the same tables in some of the suburban residences, such as the Peterhof or Catherine Palace. So this is for us to have an idea. And later on, when only in the 19th century, the Hermitage as a museum would be established, and I will show you where exactly it happened. So this is when the museum would get the name, the Hermitage. Before that, it was the museum only for the Romanov family members and for the VIP guests. This is it. So nobody, nobody else could see it. And not really many people knew about the endless, artworks and masterpieces from the collection. And I promised you some of the exhibits, and I cannot but share with you the two Leonardos that we have in St. Petersburg. The thing is that, well, Leonardo had so many students and followers, it's really countless, but when it gets to the artwork only painted by Leonardo, the world knows about 12, maybe 14, okay, maybe 15 exhibits. I mean, paintings. And the Hermitage has 2 out of those 12 or 15. 2 is still a lot. And we have 2 Madonnas. This is called Madonna Benoit because it used to be the property of the Benoit family in St. Petersburg. And it was donated to the museum. And the family didn't even know that they had Leonardo at home. They would only find out it later. And then they would give it to the Hermitage, as a gift. And there is another Madonna, Madonna Lita. If the first Madonna is one of the earliest works of Leonardo, then you see this Madonna is completely different. Different colors, the vibrant colors, richer colors, and more expensive pigments. The blue, the red would be traditionally associated with the holiness, and you can see it's given a symmetry, right? The open windows in the Renaissance artworks, they would always mean the presence of a divine spirit, and the body of a child looks more natural. So no wonder Leonardo spent so much time actually studying the human body. So it's nice to see sort of a very short but quite, illustrative retrospective of the words of Leonardo. The early one, really dark, and of course it also got dark with time, but it was darker in general. And to see one of the latest works, two different kinds of art. Titian, another masterpiece of Italian Renaissance. Sorry, that was too quick. I just want to make sure we see a little bit more of it. Well, the Repentant Mary Magdalene, I'm not going to go into details about the artwork. Well, Titian, the master, the great master of the Quattrocento, but I want us to take a look at the frame. This is the original frame. This is what it came with from the workshop of Titian. Titian was extremely prolific. He left thousands of artworks for us, but it's still, have an original by Titian and the original frame. That's something quite remarkable. And this was also the official purchase of the Hermitage Museum. Speaking of the collection, like how it was acquired, 90% of the collection are the purchases, 5% are 85 purchases, 10% are gifts, and 5% is the how shall I put it, is the exhibits that were taken from the Germany, like the trophies, after the Second World War. Other than that, these are all the legal purchases. And of course, so the World Convention, the artworks just, decided not to return any valuables from any museums. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been any British Museum anymore. So that's how it goes. And we are now in the foyer of another building. We again switched from, actually, we've just been with you in the Hermitage Pavilion, and from there we switched to another building, to the Old Hermitage, where the Italian art collection is exhibited. And I just very shortly showed you Leonardo, I showed you Titian. There will be more there will be more artworks, but it's important to understand that it was not only for art, it was also for Catherine the Great to have fun. And at some point, Catherine the Great just felt bored, there wasn't a Netflix, there wasn't even Facebook. So Catherine was just, flipping through the pages of some, magazines and books. And she thought, hey, so many European courts, have the theaters. Why can't I have a small theater for myself? So she wanted a theater, she got the theater. And as you can see, we are now in the street. So there is a small passage that would connect the two buildings of the Hermitage Pavilion, of the Hermitage Museum complex. And we're looking at the Winter Canal. So you must remember from the previous tour, if you watched it, that Saint Petersburg is called the Venice of the North because of the number of canals and rivers, which are about 100 altogether. And this is just one of the narrowest and the shortest canals. It's called Winter Canal because the Winter Palace is just there around the corner. So this is the foyer of the Hermitage Theater. And in those doors will be already the theater building, the stage. From the outside, the building looks this way. And from the inside is just this. The seats are not numbered. Of course, the best seat here would be always hers, the Stammtisch of Catherine the Great. And then here, the family members, the guests will be invited, first come, first served. And also here, well, Catherine the Great had a hobby. She would write, some short novels with a morale, like pedagogical. And those novels would be dramatized. We return to performances. Again, later on, when the theater was not enough, Catherine again was, flipping through the pages of the magazines, and she saw the illustration of the fantastic Raphael lodges in the Vatican. And you know what? a few years before that, Catherine the Great had established the Academy of Fine Arts. And she decided to send 7 best students of the Academy to the Vatican. To do what? To make copies of each and every drawing in the Raphael lodges in the Vatican, to bring them to Saint Petersburg, and to build the exact same size copy of the lodges here next to the Hermitage. And while, like, for 7 years, those students were in the Vatican, so they were given permission to make the copies. And while they were there making copies, here a special pavilion would be constructed. The only difference between the Vatican and St. Petersburg is that in the Vatican, those are frescoes. So it's the paintings on the wet plaster, oil paintings on the wet plaster. Here in St. Petersburg, with sometimes 100% humidity level, frescoes would have never survived. So those are oil paints on canvas. This is it, which only made it easier to transport and deliver all the way from the Vatican to St. Petersburg. And speaking of the mirrors, those are the original 19th century mirrors. So they were placed in the overhaul of the 19th century, when the Hermitage Museum would be opened, and they're still there. So, and again, so you must have guessed it, that we have again switched the buildings, and now we are in the building called the New Hermitage. And once you are in this new Hermitage building, you can see that the size of the rooms have changed. The windows are much bigger. You have just seen the window in the ceiling in the previous room, or we'll see it again. So this building will be constructed by 1850. In 1851, to commission of Russian Emperor Nicholas I, the Hermitage Museum would open its doors to visitors. But mind you, the mortals would not be allowed to visit the Winter Palace or the Hermitage Pavilion or any other buildings, but only the New Hermitage. And people were happy. People were happy even to pay quite a high price to visit the artworks, to see the Leonardos, to see Raphael. There used to be 3 Raphaels in the collection of the Hermitage Museum. After the revolution, one would be sold, but 2 are still here. And this is one of them, also the earliest. So this is the Madonna with the child. The frame came with the package. So it was purchased from Italy in the 19th century, when Italy was experiencing a huge economic crisis. So lots of artworks from Italy left the country because of that. And it was, well, it's the great loss for the country, but they think they still have enough. So that is okay. And the Romanovs would purchase it, and the purchase, by the way, would be made with the Romanovs money, not with the state money. And it's interesting that in the 20th century, when the restoration workshop decided, to save the painting because it was not made on canvas, it was painted on the wood. It's called tempera. So the restorers decided to transfer the painting from wood on canvas, because the wood, the bugs, the time, it would destroy the wood. But with the canvas, such things don't happen. And when they did the X-ray, they actually, it turned out that in the original painting, Madonna was holding the pomegranate. And they managed, don't ask me how, but they managed to transfer it from wood, from the wooden surface to canvas. I have no idea how they did that. And this is the second of the 2 Raphaels, also the Holy Family. And the wonderful thing about this Raphael is that these people, so Joseph, the Mother Mary, and they are dressed not the way they used to be dressed back then, you know, in the Holy Land with the hood, with long shawls and the cloaks. No, very different. They would be dressed exactly the way the Italians would be looking well at the times of Raphael. So this is what also made Raphael closer to people, and this would strike chord with everyone who saw his artworks. So the religion and mythology would all of a sudden get much closer to people. One more masterpiece that Hermitage is really proud for. Okay, well, it's, of course, I'm sure you are all well-traveled, and thanks to Mara, you're probably one of the most, you know, one of the best traveled people in the world, and I hope you will travel more. So it's not something unusual to see Michelangelo's, to see Raphael's and Leonardo's. Okay, Leonardo's probably a bit different, so it's still quite impressive. But for Saint Petersburg, a city that had only been established 50 years, you know, before, well, in this case, like 100 years before that, and then it would gradually and quite quickly would become one of the biggest museums in terms of the collection with some big names. Well, it was still a big deal, and even nowadays it's still a big deal. And to have Michelangelo's sculpture, even of this really strange, you know, this crouching boy. This is the name of the sculpture. It's still a big deal. And we can say it's Michelangelo just by looking at this, you know, look at the muscle work, look at the body, look at just. So on the one hand, it's so detailed, but on the other hand, we don't even see the face. And there is no need to see the face, but to say that this is a psychological portrait with all the muscle work nicely hewn. Well, you know that the person is in tension, is tense, is stressed, and it's Michelangelo. Now let's get back to those big rooms. So when this new Hermitage building was constructed, the idea was to build the building to be the museum. And this is the first building in the Russian Empire constructed for museum purposes. It doesn't mean that before that there were no buildings, there were no museums in the country. There had been, but this would be the first one constructed to be a museum. And you can see that St. Petersburg is the city that has maximum 80 or 90 sunny days per year. So yes, all people are gloomy and depressed, not only because they read Dostoevsky, but also because they just short of vitamin D. So to have more sources of light, the daylight, well, it was crucial for a museum. That's why, hence, there are big windows and also the glass roofs. You see the artworks. So there are a chain of rooms with this huge Baroque paintings. So of course, Italian, Spanish art. Well, Caravaggio. To have a Caravaggio is also a big deal, you know, for any museum. So we have one Caravaggio, a boy with a lute. After a certain period, actually, you know, the art historians believed it was a girl. Then they were not sure. Now they're sure this is a boy. And there are always, you know, many mysteries around Caravaggio. Even his life and especially death is a mystery. Nobody knows where he's buried. And even here, we're not exactly sure who that is. We are not exactly sure what's going on. But it's the beautiful art. So this is the combination of the chiaroscuro, the dark, the black and the white. So that's the technique that Caravaggio was absolutely impeccable. And this is probably because of the white lead used in the oil paints at that time. And Caravaggio used the white, so much of it. There's probably about this highly toxic lead that was added in the white paint that drove him eventually crazy, that made him irritable and prone to let's say aggression, and then eventually made him kill the person, and then he had to flee and then vanished. But there is one artwork that the Hermitage Museum is not particularly proud of and normally does not pay much attention to, the Goya. So Francisco de Goya, it's one of my favorite artists. Well, you know, it's quite a remarkable and unique one. And it would actually, why not? So Goya is a big name, like in the upper echelon. So like, why not actually boasting having an artwork by Goya? But the thing is, the Hermitage has only one work, and this is the portrait of the actress Antonia Zarate. I think this is her name. But this is believed to be the worst work by Goya. So it's not really much to be proud of. However, the story is very interesting. This painting was the present from Armand Hammer, an American art collector, businessman, and philanthropist. He came to Saint Petersburg. At that time, Saint Petersburg was called Petrograd. The city in the course of the 20th century was renamed several times, from Saint Petersburg to Petrograd when the First World War started, and then in 1924, after the death of Lenin, it would be named after Leningrad. And then after the collapse of the Soviet Union, it would be given its name back, Saint Petersburg, in 1991 after the referendum. So Armand Hammer came to Petrograd in 1918, and he managed, through some of the connections, so he pulled the strings back from the States, through some Jewish diaspora, he had some Jewish roots. He managed to get the appointment with Lenin, and they agreed that Armand would purchase dozens and hundreds of artworks at a very low price, and he would be purchasing more and more, and then he would make friends with Stalin, with Khrushchev, with Brezhnev. He would die in his late 90s. I don't exactly remember the year. And Armand Hammer would be the businessman that made millions, I would say gazillions of dollars on selling and reselling Russian art. Fabergé among those works. And as a token of gratitude to the Hermitage Museum and to the country, Armand Hammer gave this one artwork, the worst work by Goya. So it's up to you to decide. But what we are absolutely proud of is Rembrandt. St. Petersburg has the second, okay, hold on a second, that's too fast. I still want to stop here for a moment. St. Petersburg actually has the biggest collection of Rembrandt outside the Netherlands. That's a big deal. Whenever I had Dutch tourists, I didn't even need to ask what they wanted to see the Hermitage. I knew they wanted to see the Rembrandt. I'm going to only showcase two works. Let me check the time. Oh my goodness. Okay, we need to wrap it up very soon. But anyway, so this one of them is Danae, and this painting, you see the reflection. So this is now under the bulletproof glass. Why? Because there was an attempt to destroy the painting, quite a successful one. In the 1980s, an emotionally unstable person managed to get to the museum with a special container with the acid. And he poured the acid to the painting. And over there you can see, something's not really right. But this is believed to be one of the best restoration works in the history of art restoration. So they say Rembrandt. The second work is called The Prodigal Son. And this is one of the most remarkable works, and we're very proud to have it. As it always was with Rembrandt, this is his fantastic work with light, like the sources of art, where it comes from, like no idea, but you see that the certain elements, certain details of the painting are illuminated, like this one, the father embracing his child. Always some ghosts, some people who are like, we're not even sure if they are real or they are just ghosts. Again, this combination of the light and dark. So the Prodigal Son, we have it. It's a big deal. Now, I'm not sure how much time we have, so Mara, please feel free to stop me. But I just want to know if I have, let's say, another 5 or 7 minutes, maybe. So this room, we are actually back to the Winter Palace. And this room is called the Hall of Fame of Alexander I. Why? Because because of his victory over Napoleon. So once he returned, the life in the country changed, the perception of the country changed. Again, as I said, there would be many tourists would be coming to St. Petersburg. This was a big deal. And of course, it's not only just one room or two rooms in the Winter Palace that would commemorate the victory. There's a lot more. But just in this room, you see it's a completely different interiors. It was constructed and the room was changed in the 19th century, so after the victory, but the building was built in the 18th century. And you see, there is no really need for gold. It's basically the turquoise walls and the white moldings, white semi-columns. And in the room, you can see this, these cases. They actually showcase the collection of, by the way, this is Alexander I. Those would be the official, gifts, the diplomatic gifts that would be given to the Romanovs, over the course of a couple of centuries. And there's one thing that I didn't mention. On the Palace Square, just next to this building, it's called the General Staff Building. It used to be one of the administrative buildings constructed in the 19th century. So this wing is now with the Hermitage Museum and the Impressionist collection. But there's one thing that I haven't really talked about, but you cannot just miss it. This is the Alexander Column. This is the monument, the main monument to victory over Napoleon, and it's the world's tallest and the heaviest freestanding column, the freestanding obelisk. It stands under its own weight. It weighs 600,000 kilograms. So it's not cemented. There's no concrete. It's just there. It stands on its base and it's not going anywhere. And it is, by the way, as of several years ago, it's one of the exhibits of the Hermitage collection. It's definitely the biggest exhibit in the collection. Well, a few more rooms in the Winter Palace to walk through. I mentioned the revolution, right? So the revolution, let's say the Winter Palace as the official residence was one of the venues for the revolution. The thing is that there were two revolutions in the 1917. I will just only briefly mention them. In February, there was the first revolution. It's called the Bourgeois Revolution. After this revolution, the empire did not collapse, but the emperor abdicated. And in charge of the country would be the provisional government. And Vladimir Lenin, in October 1917, would overthrow not Nicholas II, but the provisional government. And the storm of the Winter Palace, where the provisional government would be residing, started exactly with this staircase. So the troops, it's just basically like, several hundreds of officers and soldiers of the army would storm the Winter Palace, and from the Palace Square, they would rush to the rooms in the Winter Palace to see the provisional government. And exactly here on this marble memorial plaque, these events are described. So it happened in October 25, October 26 at night. This is what it looked like. This is still from the movie released in like early 1920s. Eisenstein, Sergei Eisenstein is renowned, Russian film director, a Soviet film director. He studied in Hollywood, by the way. Lenin sent him to study in the Hollywood, then to return and to make movies, the propaganda. So this is not the actual events, but this is from the movie. So it was a big deal. It was filmed in the Winter Palace and the Palace Square, and you can still see the color. It's scarlet red. Well, you can guess it's not the green, it's scarlet red. Remember the Golden Room? So this is the Golden Room. We are in the small private section of the Winter Palace. And yes, this is, okay, let's say this is the most Golden Room. It was designed in the 19th century, and it was just the drawing room. Well, it was meant only for for small gatherings, mostly family gatherings. or let's say very, very small parties, so not everyone was supposed to see it. But I should tell you that even on the walls, these are the wallpapers gilded. The mantelpiece, you see the fireplace, you see the columns over there next to the window. It's interesting, but those columns were actually presents. It was some official gift, some diplomatic gift. And the Romanovs, they just, had no other way but to somehow place it, use it in the interior, and they needed to overhaul the room and overhaul the fireplace in order to place those two columns in the room. This small, boxes, I don't know, these are actually the 19th century furniture of the museum. Here exhibited the collection of the pins and brooches of Catherine the Great. So she was an avid collector of all those, knackeries of all sorts. In the Winter Palace, there's also an interesting collection of Romanov portraits, and there is the state portrait of Nicholas II, which is totally fine. We have the entire gallery, of paintings of the Romanovs, but on the other side of this painting is the portrait of Vladimir Lenin. It's one and the same painting. It's one and the same canvas. Interesting, right? It's like the two enemies who, by the way, never really met in life. Lenin never met, never overthrown Nicholas. Nicholas withdrawn himself. He abdicated himself in March. And we are going to talk about it in more details when we visit the Alexander Palace on the 18th of October, very soon. So the story has it that in the Soviet times, you had to, make portraits of the Soviet leaders in order to, stay afloat as an artist. And the artist, he just had in his collection the portrait of Nicholas II. It's not like it was painted, by a renowned artist. No, it was just an artist who came into possession of a portrait. It's not something expensive. It was just one of the numerous portraits. And he wanted to keep it. So he would paint something on top of the portrait of Nicholas II, then turn the canvas, put it in the frame, and then would make portrait of Vladimir Lenin, just like that. And this portrait would somehow end up in one of the Saint Petersburg schools. And then the kids, during the break, I don't know, a kid would smash it with something or fall on the painting, and then there would be a hole in it. It would be sent, to restoration, just some restoration workshop, not even at the Hermitage. And when they started, cleaning the canvas and, doing something with it, they realized there was something, there was a second layer just there from the back. And as they cleaned it, they saw a portrait of Nicholas II. So this portrait, not made by any outstanding, popular artist, would end up at the Hermitage collection because of the story that took place in the 20th century. Okay. Well, if I'm still here, it means Mary is okay with me and you're still here, so then I can continue. So definitely I failed with this challenge, but so this is what I really want you to see. We are in the wide dining room of Nicholas II and his family. Up until 1904, Nicholas and his family would be living in the Winter Palace. And exactly in this wide dining room, they would be having dinners. And this room was designed at the turn of the 20th century for the Romanovs. So this is exactly their interiors. This is their regional tapestries on the walls. And over there, you see the clock, the mantelpiece clock, and the marble memorial plaque. Unfortunately, my videographer was not allowed to enter the room. It was closed, to public. You could only see it from the doorway. But you remember the events of the night of October 25 to 26 in 1917, when the army would be in the Winter Palace storming it. in search of the provisional government. So the provisional government would be residing exactly in this room and in the next rooms. They would have a night, night conferences, night meetings here, and those revolutionary troops would go up the stairs, come to this room, open the doors and say, hello, provisional government, and goodbye. And they would approach the clock and stop it. This would put an end to the Romanovs, to the entire monarchy in Russia, once and for all. Maybe, I don't know, like maybe Putin still thinks he's a monarch, I don't know, but this would be it. And exactly for 100 years, those clocks would be stopped exactly at the same time when this happened. And then there was in 2017 when Russia celebrated their anniversary of the revolution. The head of the museum, the director, Boris Petrovsky, Mikhail Petrovsky, would just wind the clocks again. The second room where the provisional government would reside is this Malachite room. Trust me, there's just several rooms left and we are done. And we are in the private section of the Winter Palace. Why it's called Malachite? Because of the semi-precious stone malachite found everywhere around. Malachite is found in the very, very small, amounts. It's not a marble. It's like small, maybe of a palm size maximum. So in order to create a vase like that, or pilasters, the semi-columns or the columns, even the vase, you would actually need to make this from another material. It could be concrete, it could be plaster, it could be anything. And then you would cover it with the malachite plaques, very small ones, very, very thin ones, and you would place them together and polish it so it would seem as if it's the monolith piece of malachite, but it's not like that. So this is called Russian mosaic. This is the term like applied in art. So the malachite room was designed before the Romanovs, but they liked this room very much, and they would have the small family gatherings here. And there are many descriptions of these rooms in the diaries. Just another room that remembers the events of the turn of the 20th century. And also from this room, you can see the Neva River, actually the widest part of it over there. So this is where we had the tour a month ago from the Basil Island. Okay, so let's move on. We're almost done. I would like to show you this. So we are now in the very boring section of the Winter Palace. Interiors here are almost non-existent. And it's not because after the revolution, they would want to destroy something, and destroy the interiors. Actually, the contrary. After the revolution, one of the first decrees of Lenin would be to turn the Winter Palace into the museum. And one of the ideas would be to use it as a propaganda against the Romanovs, to show how rich they were and how they couldn't care less about everyone else in the country but aristocracy. That's why the interiors are non-existent. Well, because largely they were not really much interiors. Those were the bedrooms, were the private rooms. So there was no need to show off. But there is something even more interesting than the beautiful interiors. Here in this room, so those at different times, different monarchs would be occupying these rooms. And we are now at the turn of we are now in the early 20th century. And on the window, actually here on this window, there is a very, very interesting thing, an etching made by Empress Alexandra Fedorovna Alix, wife to Nicholas II. It says, Nikki is watching Hussars, March 4th, 1902. She etched it with her diamond ring as she was watching Nicholas watching Hussars march on the palace square. It's there. This is like the note from the past. Of course, nobody sees it. It's covered with the last room. It's covered with with the curtains, so it's not accessible. But I believe this is one of the most remarkable exhibits in the entire Hermitage collection. Okay, and the second most remarkable, and then probably comes Leonardo, but it's questionable. It's not to question Leonardo, but you know, the relevance. This room. This is the survived interior from Nicholas II. This is the library of Nicholas II. It's absolutely intact. It was not destroyed. It was not changed at all. So even the books, well, let's say many books, when the first, well, many books would be sold indeed, thanks to Lenin, thanks to Arm& Hammer, you know, the books from the Romanovs library. You know, the library of the Romanovs was huge. There was like millions and millions of books. They had their own librarian. They had like their own, you know, archives, you know, and it was all systemized. It was a system. They had even the library stamp. And it's by the way, one of the stamps actually in the museum, and you can see it. So, but the library is still here. It's the same fireplace, and you see this is the Gothic style. Well, it's like, you know, the Gothic style would be reworked, you know, reapproached, reassessed in the early 20th century when the eclecticism would come into its own, and. Well, thanks to the photographs, and there were numerous photographs taken just before the revolution. Well, we can compare, and we can actually say, well, yeah, exactly. This is the same interiors. There is no fireplace. Well, it's not in use. But as for the rest, this is it. Some of the interiors no longer exist for several reasons. Also because some of the exhibits would be sold. Also with time, well, during the Soviet times, some of the rooms would be changed. But as I said, it will be just 1 or 2%. As for the rest, it's original, it's here, and this is the wealth of the Hermitage Museum. I am very sorry, I have overrun. I'm done. And I'm happy to answer all the questions you might have.
It's okay. Don't be embarrassed and don't be shy of it. Everyone enjoyed it and loved the presentation. So I don't think that it is anything to worry about that we've run a little bit long. It's well worth it. I just put up a slide as a way to thank Anna for her expertise and sharing the Hermitage and its contents with us. Feel free to drop her a tip. There's plenty of ways, whether that's Venmo, whether it's PayPal, or whether you go to our website, Girl Travel Tours, and just leave a tip through a credit card. We have many ways for you to do that. So thank you very much. And thank you, Anna, for your extensive tour, even though I know that there are probably rooms that we didn't get to see. Maybe, you know, maybe that's a part B, but as you all are looking at this slide, you'll see that we have plenty of physical tours that we are going on in the next few years. So if you're interested in them, you can also email me directly. Don't drop it in the chat because the chat will go away after this, but you can email me directly. It's very difficult. I'm going to jump to the Q&A. It's very difficult, I think, for the Q&A because I'm going to be asking you things about parts of the museum that were, you know, 45 minutes ago into your talk, and it's a little bit challenging, I think, sometimes to bring it up or to bring it back into your head as to where you were. So we'll do our best and see what we can do in terms of recollection. But the first question, which happened almost at the start of the presentation, do you know where the marble comes from for this building? Where is it? Where, if you can comment on the materials?
Yeah, so the marble came from Italy, the white marble, the Carrara marble. I actually visited Italy and I went to Carrara to see those huge marble deposit and those you know, stone works. It's there, you know, it's there in Carrara. And yes, it's all the best marbles, but not only white marble, sienna marble, different kinds of pink marble, they're there. So yeah, for these residents, only the best materials, because this is the residence.
During the siege, were the buildings protected or was there any damage from the citizens?
So there was no damage from the citizens. The buildings were disguised. On the Winter Palace, there was a huge piece of fabric thrown. Can you imagine to throw a piece of fabric on the Winter Palace that has like 3,000 rooms, but it was made.
Yeah.
So the Soviet aviation, not only they had to, like fight back and protect the city, but they also had to just, do this duty of covering, disguising the buildings. And you know what they did? That fabric had this pattern. It was, camouflaged as if it was the Neva River. So for the Nazi aviation, it looked as if it was the continuation of the Neva River. So it didn't really suffer. There was only some minor damages, like in one of the rooms, the room with the coat of arms, if you remember, with the golden columns all around the room, there was one window was crashed, like part of the wall was like smashed. And if you try really hard, if you Google, you will actually see black and white photos with the snow lying in the room, like on the floor.
Mhm.
Other than that, really, it's a miracle, but
Wow.
it
is a miracle. Yeah. If you think back to when you were taking us through the church room, what is the little glass cabin in there? Do you remember that?
Yeah. That's a good question, actually. I forgot to mention. This was the private cubicle of Catherine the Great, designed especially for her. There was a door that would connect us directly to her rooms, to her bedroom and the chain of rooms that she used, because the church is like in between. Let's say here to the left would be the private rooms, and to the right would be the room of the 1812 heroes, and then all those official gala rooms. So from there, Catherine the Great would enter the church. She could stay there in the cubicle, or she could just come to the church per se, and then she could continue wherever she wanted. That's it. And all the other prelates would do the same.
Let's talk about the color of the exterior. Why was the red exterior changed out for the current color?
That's a good question. It only happened after the Second World War in the Soviet times, and it's still a mystery, like why. But this was maybe because they had the best color they had, and the necessary amount would be the green. We don't know about it. It's just the decision, and of course it was coordinated with with Moscow, with the person above, but it was changed in the Soviet times. That's it. And it's not only that, the original color of the Winter Palace was actually yellow. It was yellow, then it would be scarlet red, and then it would be green.
Okay. Somebody's mentioning the Amber Room.
Amber Room is in a different residence. Mary, it's only up to you. If at some point you would want me to take you to the Catherine Palace in Tsarskoye Selo, in the Tsar's village, then we'll definitely visit the Amber Room and talk about it. It's in the suburbs. It's in a different residence.
Oh, okay. Totally different place. Not even in the same complex then, right?
Yeah, totally different.
And there's a question from Cynthia here. Did you take us by the Mariinsky Theater? Is that what was? No, right?
No. This is the private theater of Catherine the Great. It's called Hermitage Theater. But you're right, actually, this is like the second best place to watch Russian ballet. Well, before the war, before the pandemics and the high season, there was no way you could purchase tickets, to the Mariinsky. Even locals couldn't do that. It was all like booked years, before, by travel companies, by tourists, And if there were no tickets left, well, the next best ballet would be at the Hermitage Theater. And it still works. So it's still the Hermitage Theater where you can watch ballet. But it's not the Mariinsky.
Okay, so let's see. So I guess one of the question was about all the fireplaces we saw and all of the beautiful mantles, right? Was that the only source of heat during the winter?
No, as I said, in the 18th century, it would be the stoves and the fireplaces. Yes. So the fireplace, you know what it looks like. And the stove is basically it's like the fireplace, but you cannot see the open source of fire. It's you know, it's in the walls. And sometimes like the two rooms would share, sometimes even four rooms would share the stove, like the big stove. It would be, first it would be wood, and you can imagine how many tons of wood would be used in the winter residence. And then it would be coals. And in the 19th century, early 19th century, the steam machines would be implemented, and they would be used for over a century. And it was a big problem because of the soot, you know, everything would be covered with this. So the humidity, the soot, and all of this would affect the artworks immensely.
Yeah. In the Golden Room, what were the glass triangles? Does that?
So those are the, as I said, those would be the original cases for Catherine the Great's collection of pins, the brooches, the cameos, so, and all the small, you know, like jewelry.
Sure.
But they would be made not at times of Catherine the Great, but they would be made in the 19th century for museum purposes.
So we have a question for you from Jackie. Have you seen the 1957 movie Anastasia, starring Ingrid Bergman, sorry?
I know
and
of the movie.
Obviously, there was an animated movie and also the musical later on. So that's, I guess, that's the favorite, right?
I know of it, but I didn't watch it.
I've seen it on Broadway, so I think it's all wonderful. It's very, very good. So somebody's asking about Catherine Palace and if we're going to do a tour of that in the future.
Absolutely. I have it all recorded.
Sure.
So it's up to you, Mara, whenever you wish to schedule it.
Wonderful. Oh, here's a nice comment from Carol. She says, your extensive knowledge of art and art history just added to the wonderful tour, so thank you. And as someone who has read a lot of I'm going to say this wrong, but Dostoevsky in Russian, she got your joke that you kind of put out there. So that was a nice little plug for you.
It's true. You know, Dostoevsky is, well, you know, like once you read Dostoevsky, and it's like one of the most, you know, like popular Russian writers, and like all his novels are very depressing. You know, they are very, like, you know, introspective. There's a lot of moral there, but they're very dark. And well, now you know, like one of the reasons why Dostoevsky was so gloomy, because he just didn't have enough vitamin D. Like, it's true.
I will remember him when I take my vitamin D pill later on tonight. We have one request. I thought this actually was a really fascinating story, so I'll go with it and listen to it again from you. But they're asking if you could repeat the story of the etching of the diamond ring.
Okay, yeah, sure. So in 1902, on the 4th of March, if I'm not mistaken, Alexandra Fedorovna was standing on the windowsill looking at Nicholas II, who was at the palace square watching the Hussars regiment parade in front of him. So like maybe they were preparing for, I don't know, for some marching, I don't know. But Nicholas was the patron of the Hussars army regiment. And he watched his army regiment, you know, perform or like, I don't know, rehearse for something. And as she was watching Nicholas II, she would etch this text on the window, on the glass with her diamond ring. It's still there. Nikki watching Hussars. Alexandra Fedorovna was the granddaughter to Queen Victoria, so she was half English, okay, half German, and she spoke mostly English. Among themselves, they spoke English. With children, it would be different. They tried to speak Russian, but that was made in English. That's the story.
Really interesting. I absolutely love when a story has like a personal touch in the sense that you can put yourself in that exact moment, right? That's awesome. Yeah. All right. Well, it looks like we have finished all of our questions and the tour in itself. So thank you everybody for coming, and thank you, Anna. We will put your other tours on the schedule and we'll see you back here. But thanks a lot. Have a good day, everybody, and take care. We'll see you soon.
Thank you so much, everyone, for the fantastic comments, for the thank yous, for the compliments. It really means the world to me. So 18th of October, the Alexander Palace, and the next tours will be announced by Mara. Thank you so much for the support, for the kindness and understanding. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.